in the holidays, especially like the 4th of July or something, because there would be absolutely nobody else there, and you could go into the conference room and play Doom on the big screen or something like that. But yeah. Very good. Right, I think we're live. I've got a wee signal here from Ryan. So welcome everybody who's joining us. This will be a very relaxed event, as you can probably guess from the hat. Yeah. Can I say, please hold up your left hand if you're currently sober? That's what I thought. Okay, so this is going to be a fairly relaxed discussion just to end out the year. There has been virtually no preparation done or anything like that. Just to kick off, in case I forget at the end, by saying I am incredibly grateful to all of you folks for joining. We're not going to go round and do introductions because it would take too long, and you're all famous anyway. I do have one announcement, which is that obviously for all the virtual bashes, we're recording them, so we will be putting out a playlist. So there will be the 2021 bash playlist released after this event, and we'll put it out in all the usual social media channels. Right, so without further ado, let's launch into it. So we've got 4 topics. Might not make it all the way through. We'll just see what fits into an hour, but we're going to go through them in the order in which people voted for them. So the first one is remote working. So I'll just kick off with a question, and anybody who wants to can answer first. So what, if anything, has permanently changed about the way we work? And is this change for the good? Anybody want to go first?
I think I'm going to kick off with Garth. I think you're on mute. That is the phrase that we hear all the time.
You just scared the hell out of me.
I created this. I couldn't be so nerds. Sorry. I can. I used it at least 3 times a day.
Yeah. Well, mine when I'm teaching is you've forgotten to share, so I'll just be talking about this code at the top. You see that, and then down there, there's the other thing. And sometimes I'm talking so fast, it takes about 2 minutes for somebody to break in. But by the end of a 4-day course, they're like, Garth, screen! Sorry.
Or you're sharing the wrong screen and you're sharing your personal email instead of the presentation. Like, oh no, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah. That's why I now use 2 computers. I've got the one here for business and the one here for anything that may get me fired. So I adopted that policy early on. That's
all those pictures of cats.
Yes, exactly.
I think on a more serious note, like I know that lots of people here were used to being able to work remote. I've always worked on split site, cross time zone teams my whole career. So in some ways we didn't change a lot. We were able to go home and kind of work the same way we had. But I think in lots of jobs outside of tech, it was a huge shift, and they had to find ways to work remotely that they had never done before. So it was a huge change for everybody else, but tech kind of just carried on the way it was. I don't know if other people find that too.
Well, I want to make a caveat to that. I agree with that, but I want to make a caveat, which is that I've been working remotely for about 8 years. I live in Spain. I've been remote here for the whole time. The last 2 years have been the most difficult years for working. So I do want to stress, people have said this before, I want to stress it again, that remote working during a pandemic is not the same as normal remote working. It's exhausting, even regardless of the worrying about the safety and health of your friends and family and not knowing what's happening with lockdown and how the rules are changing this week. The fact is that you can't use any of the usual escape valves to kind of like mitigate the fact that you work remotely. So normally I work remotely and I go to conferences like once a month, every other month, something like that. And that's a good way to meet up with people from other countries, meet up with developers, hear stories, and get feedback on what I'm doing, what's going well, what's not going well. Or I can fly home because I'm not from Spain and see my dad and see my sister or see my friends or whatever. And I haven't been able to do that for 2 years. So I think some people are really struggling with remote work because it does take an adjustment. It also requires a certain mindset. Like I really like remote working because you sit down at your computer and no one talks to you and you get some work done. But if the kids are at home, if your partner's working next to you, if you don't get any of the release files, if you can't go to the coffee shop and work in the coffee shop, because our coffee shop now bans working there because they need to be able to get people in and out really, really quickly. It's not the same. It's not the same thing. So yeah, things have changed. I think remote working is a great thing. I'm very on board with remote working. What I don't want is for people or companies to think that this mode of working remotely is normal, because it's as far from normal as you can get.
Also, there's the thing that some people were kind of thrown into working remotely. I love it. I'm an introvert. I just love the silence. But other people are going like kind of crazy, which is one thing. One thing that really struck me was when I saw parents of like young kids trying to work, and you used to just see the 3-year-old literally coming and bashing the keyboard. The person would be like, "I'm really sorry," and they feel really stressed because they're like, "I'm trying to work and I'm trying to present myself in a professional way, etc." Yeah. But they can't because they physically can't do anything about it. And I think some workplaces have been better than others. I gotta say, listen, just don't worry, do whatever you can, and it's grand. But
I agree with that completely, because I was freelance for a few years before I went to work for Instill. And one of the things that I said, look, I had to give up freelancing was whenever the kids were home and you've got an important conference call and you're there like, look, Daddy loves you. Daddy really cares. Daddy loves you lots, but Daddy has this goal. Daddy has this goal. Daddy will play with that later. Daddy really loves you and really cares and will do this. You've been watching Fireman Sam for the past 90 minutes. Why can't you do it for 20 more? That's definitely a thing. Yeah.
Certainly on the sort of the social front, our local group set up a Discord channel, and we've had a water cooler channel where people can drop in anytime. We've done a Friday night social, which has been video calls, where people have got in just to try and simulate that. I'm talking to people who are not necessarily work colleagues, and try and make the not normal be a little bit more normal, because even some of the introverts I know are struggling.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point to pull up on, because I was struggling to think about what's changed for the good. I'm not really sure. But from my point of view, as someone who's worked remotely at JetBrains for the last 7 years, so the developer advocates are all remote. We're all distributed. A lot of us are in Europe, but we work in different countries. And so we're kind of used to working in a distributed remote way. But the developers are co-located in an office, and they sit together, talk together, hear what's going on. They don't share a lot of stuff outside of the office. So for me, the positive of everyone going remote is that finally I'm speaking to people I didn't speak to before. I'm hearing news I didn't hear before. There's things in place, things like the remote all hands meetings, and we have like these donuts where you randomly meet people and chat to them, which actually allows me to be much more integrated to the company than before. Whereas before, we just kept having to jump up and down and say, we're here, we're remote, and we have no freaking idea what's going on with the product.
Yeah. And I've been a developer advocate at a very large organization, which shall remain mentioned, it'll be AWS, and that was incredibly difficult, because even though there were a bunch of people that were remote and there was a massive team that I could be a part of, I was still very separate. But I could talk to anyone, but that meant that other people had an idea of how you should work. And I think that's where remote working has now changed, is that I think everyone now gets the idea that being at home is not necessarily the easy ride. It's not about being, you get to have more time with everybody, you get to do this. There are other distractions by being at home, and that the distractions will it's just a different way of doing things. Yes, there are some real positives. You're not commuting. You're not doing that is a really, really big change. And I'll recount a quick story, because I'm now doing some work with GDS in London. Well, not London, everywhere, but I'm working with two kids. That's really mean. Two young adults who have just come out of university and are now on the fast track scheme in the civil service. I call them kids because I've got two who are almost the same age as them. That's why. Anyway, and they both have the experience of essentially working in a pandemic, and that's the only experience that they've got. And so I'm talking to them about, oh my goodness, it's so completely different working now, because you don't have to commute. And they're looking at me with this kind of, I don't actually know what that's like. So there's this whole group of people coming through now who haven't actually got the experience of years of commuting and years of doing this and then having to go to work remote. So I think there's a group of people that will turn around and go, well, I'm not going to go back to you're not going to tell me to go back to an office and turn up 5 days a week in an office, an hour away from my house. That's not going to happen.
I think that's definitely one of the good things.
Yeah,
I agree.
Missing, not commuting.
It's just that too many people will go like, I'm just not wasting 3 hours of my life a day. Just not.
Yeah.
There's one tiny downside from not having the commute, actually. So I don't miss a commute at all, but the commute is the buffer between home and work. And one of the things I found, and again, it's a bit difficult for me because I had kids while I was working remotely. So there's a conflation of concerns there. But as soon as I had kids and I'm working remotely, I mean, they're not home during the day. They're away from 9 till 6. But I only have a 5-minute commute to go and pick them up from where they're being looked after. And it's not enough time to decompress. It's not enough time to put stuff on the back burner. And it's not enough time to give yourself some time to not have either work people saying, boss, what can I do? What's happening here? Or kids going, mummy. You need something to separate the two.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with that more, because I mean, I have normally a 40-minute train journey, which I absolutely hate, but it does give me time to get past my hate, and you can kind of decompress and put on your friendly daddy face or whatever, where at the moment, you finish the working day, I stand up, I open that door, so the family life comes back at you. So definitely.
The other issue with the commute for me was like a stop. And I'm just looking at Slack here. Tuesday, the 14th of December, 00:55. I may have forgotten to stop working. I was working on a problem and time kind of ran away with me. And normally I'd have an alarm saying you've got to go catch a train. And if I didn't catch that train, it's an hour later. Yeah. It's a very conscious decision. And okay, I'll do another hour because I'm into it. But yeah, at 1 a.m, and you're like, oh, it's 1 a.m. Whoops. Yep.
I have a hard stop. I have the children. Mummy, stop.
Go on.
I do have a certain amount or some certain number of things that I think have improved in a way across society. One thing that I've seen is that people are saying that they will not fly to another city to have a 1-hour meeting. They're like, no. I'm not doing that. We're going to do that, on video. And I think the climate impact of people just actually doing that, whereas we've been talking about it in tech for a decade, that people should do that. And now people are like, I'm never doing that again. I wasted an entire day. I have to do all of this stress just to talk to you for an hour. I'm not going to do it. And also the people that people outside of tech feel that talking on video is normal. It's not super weird things, very uncomfortable. They've gotten used to it, which is awesome. So a lot of things like that makes it possible to, and also combine it with family. How are you going? Lots of travel that you don't have to do anymore, and also choosing to be personal. Like when we meet, as then we are we're going to use this time for building interpersonal relationships. It's more meaningful. Here in Norway until now, we're in a new mini lockdown right now. But before that, when we actually got together, it was meaningful in the office. It was let's have waffles, let's talk, let's it didn't feel wasteful because it felt valuable to build those relationships in a way. So I maybe we appreciate each other more when we meet.
I agree with that completely. One of the things that I've been trying to cut down on my conferences for years, because it's a lot of effort to travel. Not being able to go to conferences has made me realize what value I get out of them. But it means I'm going to be much more deliberate in future, what travel I do. I'm going to travel to cities where I already have friends or family so that I can actually see the people I haven't been able to see for 2 years. I'm going to go to the conferences where people I want to talk to and be with are there. I'm not going to do a 3-stage flight to somewhere for the sake of giving a 1-hour talk, like you say. I'm not going to do that. It's just not worth it. I'm just going to take much more joy in the things and be much more deliberate about the things that I do in future, especially with travel.
We really love it with the teaching for that reason, because we can now deliver training anywhere in the world, you know, on the same terms as anybody else. And we don't have to worry about their commute and our commute and their setup and so on. So you can get a lot more value into the same amount of time. And I thought I would love it because fundamentally I hate people, you know, so I thought that remote teaching would be, you know, far better for me than classroom training. But it turns out I find it 2 or 3 times as stressful. You know, a 3-day course remote, I find 2 or 3 times as stressful as a classroom-based course. And I tried to work out why this is. And I think whenever you're actually physically in a room with people, you're getting all the little subconscious cues, you know, that people are actually listening and engaged and happy and so on. And you can get a little bit of that, you know, over the video, but not as much, you know, definitely not as much.
And also you need to be that deliberate, as Trisha was saying, the deliberateness is a thing. Also, I think it's super useful to try to have some banter in the calls and kind of try to talk about the cat and, you know, how you ate 53 mince pies and maybe that was a terrible idea. Or people, right? I mean, 53 is probably too much. I think should have stopped at 42, but
I've got a bright light in my face. I've got a bright light in my face. If I'm training, I've got this bright light in my face for 8 hours. And that's quite draining. And also, I love the sound of my own voice, but I hate watching myself. So having to look at myself for 8 hours is not good.
Have you thought about a paper bag or something like that? You know,
Right.
this handy, you can
I do think that a few years ago I would have been very nervous about going fully remote. And then after I worked for a couple of years from home, I'm like, actually, it's no big deal. And, you know, I have just changed jobs and it is a fully distributed remote team who work extremely asynchronously because they're extremely like broad time zones. And you realize, you know what, you can go and do a lot more different things that you wouldn't have maybe thought about before. You were thinking like local. And I think companies are also thinking, you know what, maybe we can, you know, bring other people into the team who are further away. And it's opening up being able to mix teams in more diverse ways than people would have thought about before.
Yeah, I think there's a big shift in trust from companies to employees that they realized that when people worked at home, they were still working. Whereas I think there was a lot of distrust before, like, yeah, you're going to be at home eating pizza on the sofa and I'm going to be paying you. And then they actually realized that these people were not only as productive in the office, maybe more productive, and not always in a good way. Like I've seen people maybe work too much because they're at home. They don't have the natural breaks and the natural like socializing aspects of like an office job. So I think suddenly employers suddenly realize that the problem isn't that they don't work enough. It's more that we have to make sure they don't work too much, and that shifted a lot of trust, I think, and so I think in the future we'll see more hybrid working, not only in tech but like in all other workplaces. I've spoken to many people who are like, yeah, some days of the week I want to work at home so I can concentrate, and some days of the week I want to go in the office and meet people and talk to them, and then they shift their work around in the week to be able to do that. And I think it's probably maybe more healthy. But you know, we have to get out of this pandemic.
Yes.
I wanted to pick on something Gillian said, actually. I like that. One of the things I like about remote work is, like you said, the ability to pick a more diverse workforce from different places, not be limited by where you live. But one of the things I also noticed, which I enjoy about being forced to stay in Spain whilst working remotely, is I also enjoy being much more local. So in a weird way, you enjoy your locality more because you have to stay where you are, drink in your local coffee shops, find out all your local restaurants. I've had to make way more local friends rather than relying on conferences or traveling to the city or whatever. So I get this. So I have a closer community physically close to me, but a wider reach in terms of my work. So I think to some extent you can kind of get the best of both worlds, but it does require a lot of balance.
Very much so. Right. If everybody's okay, let's just keeping an eye on the time here. Let's move on to topic 2. And I know this is one that we have experts on, so I'm just going to ask a very broad question and then let you go. So, as software developers, how can we make a positive impact on climate change? So.
Oh, I'm going to take this one straight away. So first things first. The choice of programming language only makes a small difference unless you're working at massive scale. So, you know, if you really want to go down that route, then choose Rust. But really, it's going to make very little difference. The bigger changes are going to be things like understanding what your cloud provider / data center is, what electricity it's running on. Then the next kind of thing is going to be understanding your maintenance and management pathways, because that's going to mean how much time and energy you spend on looking after what you've built, because that's actually an awful lot more time and energy than you realize. Most people just think about it in terms of, you know, a product and development and then it stops, but actually the life cycle of the whole thing is a lot more. So that bit matters, because most people just think, oh, I'll just build it and then hand it over. That bit's actually far more interesting. So things like automation and, you know, proper thinking about your pipeline are actually really big here.
I'm gonna actually say that that's all right, but sometimes just it feels, especially if your product is not, you know, it's not like a massive thing. Yep. It's like, okay, I know that this is not enough. So I kind of went down that route myself, and I started realizing that specializing and learning something that you're interested in and trying to contribute that in that area might be also a way to do it. So, for example, I am interested in mobility. I don't work in mobility, but I'm interested in it. And through learning that, I learned, for example, that you can not that expensively convert the car from a combustion engine to an electric, and that there is open source, not only software, but hardware to do it. And that, you know, maybe you could go towards saying, okay, there is a, you know, impact on the vehicles, impact on how you do your own mobility, how you do your own mobility locally. The thing I think that I think as a general guide is try to find something that you actually can hold on to it and keep doing. Although ultimately the thing that really matters is, and that really affects everything, is changes in law. So as long as the systems that drive everything just keep enabling the things that destroy the planet, we're not in a good place. So, you know,
absolutely,
you can try to do something.
There's also something that Paul mentioned to do with sort of the governance and everything. I'm going back a while here, back in the 2000s. When I worked in banking, all of my software ran on E4500s, which were fairly chunky Sun servers. And the reason they ran on E4500s is because I had a template request form that would get me the hardware. So I would just copy and paste that template request form, because if I made any changes, I was unlikely to get the hardware I required. So you're running these chunky, expensive servers to run pathetically small programs, just because that's what the governance and that's what the management process has put in place.
Yeah, it's basically, you're talking about system thinking, and I think we're all thinking about the same stuff, right? So you're thinking about systems that basically don't allow you to change anything, and I'm kind of talking about, like, okay, systematize on, or think about this, how things affect you on something that you care about, in my case, mobility. But ultimately, I think if we don't get involved at a political level, it's very hard to make meaningful change. And I hate that. I hate that, because it's like, I'm not going to get into politics, like, I'm not going to become a politician, for example, but it does mean you have to engage with at least your local place, because it's where you can get the most impact. I think kind of Trisha, in a way, kind of mentioned it. It's like, oh, suddenly we're very local, and we have to. And so, you know, you can engage at that level too. And I think, Paul, you have some experience in that, haven't you?
I've got lots of experience. I was just going to say, there are lots and lots of areas that we could talk about, and I'm kind of, you know, hand waving about lots and lots of different bits here. But I think there's if we want to talk about what people can do now, I think there's a range of things. The best thing to do actually is nothing to do with tech. It's actually just get involved with campaigning and get involved with the outside of the tech world. Because I think the tech world is, if you look at what we've been doing over the last few years, we've actually been putting pressure on, you know, the cloud providers like AWS and Google and Azure to, you know, put their money where their mouth is and start actually going green, which largely they are actually doing, and they're actually solving that problem, not perfectly, but they're doing some of that. They're still doing other things, and, you know, much as there might be someone on this call who is working for one of them, I'm not going to overly criticize them at this point. But I think they're
You're
going
free
in,
to.
Oh, that's fine. I used to work for AWS, obviously. So, but, you know, there are some things that they should be doing that they're not, and there are some things that they have done which other companies are just nowhere near doing. So I think they're going in a good direction. I think they could go faster. I just think they're going. I don't necessarily think that's the best angle to attack for the wider software industry. I think there's things that we should be doing. I think the things that we as an industry should be looking at are, you know, pushing all companies to think about things like their supply chain and things like their understanding of data within their organizations. Because most techies think about, oh, it's code. I'll think about the code. I'll think about my bit. Every other bit of the organization can, you know, I'm not responsible for that. And I think that's where we as an industry need to start taking a little bit of an understanding that actually science and scientists did that for 30 years and it didn't really work, where they went, actually, we'll tell you about the science and you figure it out. And I actually think we have a lot more power because we have been the industry that's driving so much of the wealth that has been created. I think we should be looking at trying to drive much more of the change in the wider industry around climate. So I think that it's not so much how can we change what we're doing to make some kind of a difference. I think we should be looking at how we use our power to change an organization to then change how they look at climate. So that's how I would think about it.
Because I think I've seen a shift in how people are behaving. They are choosing different jobs. They're saying, like, I've spoken to many people who are saying, I don't want to work in oil. I don't want to work in anything oil related. I don't want to work in anything, you know, anything that I have ethical qualms with. That could be human rights. That could be, you know, that could be many different things. And I think that we are usually extremely privileged in having lots of options, and people are choosing jobs not necessarily for money, but for impact and for achieving personal and ethical and you know goals in the world. Like, what would I like to see in the world, and what do I want to contribute to? And we are contributing to all aspects of society and industry, and I think we have a lot of power there. Just because people are saying, oh, it's really, really hard to recruit people here because we're doing this thing, maybe we shouldn't be doing this thing.
I also wanted to circle back to something else we talked about in terms of the remote working. Some of the tools that our industry provides, like Zoom, etc., have been able to minimize the amount of travel that we have to do. When I spent some time looking into climate change, I was looking at what I wanted to do is I wanted to find a statistical argument for why we need to write high performance code. As in, if you write high performance clean code, it's better for the environment, but it's negligible compared to air travel or cars, etc. So I think that being able to provide people with tools so they don't have to use things like airplanes or cars, I think is a good thing. And what everyone was saying as well about the sort of systemic change to be like, let's just hop on a call. Let's not hop on a plane. You know, let's have these conversations remotely. Let's use the technology. We do have it. Let's make the most of it.
Yeah.
And that would impact the call be if it wasn't a call. We've got at least 3 different countries. Yeah, and all the attendees turning up, even if they sort of drive or catch public transport. It's a huge amount, and it's replaced by a call.
Yeah, and this comes back back to data. It comes back to your conversation around, is there statistical information that tells you about what the impacts are of X, Y, and Z? And we generally don't have that data, and certainly not data at an organizational level. For example, we still only really have good data on moving workloads from data centers to the cloud as being good for the environment. That's about the level of information that we have. We don't have, if you move this kind of workload to the cloud, then you will end up with, we just don't have, it's virtually impossible to do. It's so hard to get that level of detail. So it kind of makes the point that actually those kinds of decisions are not that important. The important decisions are the much bigger, wider, reducing the amount of travel, reducing the amount of movement of stuff. So not just about travel of people, but traveling stuff traveling around. Understanding your supply chains and what your suppliers are, how much carbon and greenhouse gas emissions from your suppliers, which is a huge hole in the understanding of emissions. All of those kinds of things, and we can start to produce tools and information in and around that. But which is why I talk about, we have power within our organizations to be able to produce that information. It's not easy, but I think that's where we should be looking rather than trying to make better code, because our code is fine. It's not going to make a huge amount of difference. And that is offset by using better compute, as has been already mentioned. One
thing that I've spoken to many people about throughout this pandemic is when we went remote on everything. We went remote on conferences and things like that, and meetups as well. And a lot of people in sub-Saharan Africa or in other countries suddenly got access to a lot of content and venues and communities that they previously were unable to access. And I think a lot of this spreading of knowledge and skills and communities and networks to other parts of the world is also an extremely important part here for bringing everybody on board, both for building personal skills and lifting up your personal life. But a little bit like Trisha said earlier, your local community and the needs that are there, and you can contribute. And also a little bit like Andrea said about mobility, right? You can contribute your skills to solve local problems, and climate change is going to be 500 million local problems, right? And so if we can help bring the knowledge to those local communities, build up people there that can solve problems for people in their neighborhood, in their cities, then that will be extremely valuable. And we'll need that because I'm not sure politicians will save us.
And I think people are genuinely curious about this kind of thing in a way that they weren't before. Because a few weeks ago, one of my friends who's into politics just completely blindsided me, and they went, "Garth, what's really wrong with Bitcoin then?" And I was like, "Give me half an hour."
How have you managed to get it down to half an hour?
I want to respond to the comment that someone's just made, because I think that's actually a really interesting one, the environmental impact of making more and more powerful development machines. I actually think that's a really important point. I agree that actually it's a really bad idea to continue making computers and making massive computers that last for 3 years and then we replace them. There are tools out there to do remote development. There are tools out there. There are cloud development platforms. What's it called on AWS? Cloud9 is the one that I know about. It's not brilliant. It's fine. You GitHub. You can press the period, and you get code editor, and you've got options to not have to have a powerful development environment anymore on your machine. I'm a massive advocate of serverless computing, as are other people on this call, and the whole point of that is to reduce your impact by not having to use so much compute power on yourself. You're trying to reduce your impact on the amount of compute that you use by essentially using tiny amounts of compute only when you need it. So I think there are patterns of usage within the industry where actually we should be looking at reducing our impact in those kinds of ways. And this comes down to, when you have reduce, reuse, recycle, those three words, the first one's actually reduce, and most people just think about reuse and recycle. So I think that's the key. I think is that actually we should be starting to think about reduce as the big thing. And just as a quick aside, your cloud bill is roughly a proxy for the amount of electricity you use. So if your cloud bill is high, it just means you're using a lot of electricity. That's a nice simple proxy.
On the converse point to that, you should be using sort of remote things in a thin client. One of the problems I have is I live in rural Norfolk, and a lot of rural Norfolk is serviced by a cell phone company called No Service, which means that if you have cloud-based stuff, it just doesn't work. So actually, back in the days when I used to commute, my builds would take longer at certain points on the commute because I use Go, and Go goes out to a website to check whether the packages you've got are valid. And that times out. So a build that would take 2 seconds suddenly takes 30 seconds. Discord stops working properly. Google Docs, oh my God. And we're talking about people in sub-Saharan Africa and places like that coming in and learning these skills. They're not likely to have good connection. And a lot of these tools are built with the idea that you are living in San Francisco and you have ultra-fast connections wherever you are. So we need to sort that out.
Assumptions.
I would like to yes and everything. Before anyone criticizes IntelliJ IDEA for using up all the CPU and RAM on your computer, we also have developed remote development as well. And
I was just going to mention, I wonder if there was anybody else on the call who would have recently launched a product that might have some bearing on this discussion.
We got a few now, actually. And Dom, your concerns are absolutely right as well. Like one of the interesting things, especially as someone who sits on planes a lot, or used to 2 years ago, it's important to be able to have that the consistent experience, whether you're like connected to the internet or not. So anything which has got some sort of useful thin-ish client as opposed to like browser-based stuff and remote development. By the way, I have to say, I actually don't know how our remote development stuff works because I haven't looked at it yet. But yeah, like I think some sort of move back to, I don't know, maybe client server rather than, cloud plus chunky laptops is an interesting move in terms of helping everyone really.
Yeah,
and to be fair, Golan's only using 30% of one of my CPUs. Motion's using most of it because I'm doing a render in the background. And Google Chrome, because I'm forced to use Chrome for this call, is using 60% of the CPU and all my memory because I've got 2 tabs open.
That was a direct bash at you, Gareth, there, I heard. Forcing Dom to use Chrome.
Well, maybe the problem is Chrome because I'm on Chromium and I'm using like tiny bits of like all my CPUs that are less than 20%. I'm looking at them now. So maybe switch to Chromium, remove all the adware, and you're good.
Yeah. So Paul or others on the call, like what good resources are out there for people? Like what would you recommend? Is there?
Well, there is. There are loads of them, but they aren't very easy to find. It depends what you're looking for. I would. So one thing I would say, and it's very recent, and it's AWS based, and that's not a big thing. It's not because I love AWS. It's just I actually think it's brilliant. Is their well-architected framework sustainability pillar, which has just come out at reInvent. While it's AWS, it's still actually superb, and I will fully endorse it because it just talks about all of the things that we've already talked about in terms of how to make sustainable software. That's worth a read. Go and have a look at it. Otherwise, there is climateaction.tech, which is a Slack group which has got a few thousand people on it now. It's
about
like
6,000 now.
6,000, yeah. Yeah, and that is a group of tech people who are trying to use their skills to do something about climate change. Is probably the best way of putting it.
Yeah, I'm a member there, and there's groups for everything. So, for example, you like OPSI stuff and web development things. So there's they did a thing called the Green Web Foundation, and so that's the greenwebfoundation.org. for example, and they did a little framework, well, maybe not little language, the framework that tells you about, you can put your website there and it checks. If you think it's not greening the web enough for you, you can contribute to the project. If you like to do mobility, you can go to the channel on mobility. If you care about food wastage and how to improve it, go there. It's a great way to connect. And Sandra and the team there are doing an amazing job to get the welcome people in and kind of funnel them to the places of interest, or you can just browse. There's also local places, and all through Slack, although they're thinking about moving off Slack.
Well, because it uses up so much energy.
I think it's because, it's like everyone uses Slack, so everyone knows how to use it. So very easy entry, but then limited in other ways. So if you care about that, you can help the group that is thinking about that. Ta-da!
Brilliant. Very, very good. Right, so again, just watching the time there, I think we've got a nice segue, because we were talking about tooling and so on, into topic number 3. So let me just ask the question. So we live in a polyglot programming world. I mean, I'm currently simultaneously trying to learn about 6 languages and it's not working out, but there's a huge number of new languages, huge number of new tools out there, frameworks, cloud, all the rest of it, So what at the moment is genuinely worth the effort, and what's snake oil?
Java.
Which one? In which category?
Whatever category you wish.
Just don't log anything and it's fine.
I don't know. I'm going to jump in with my thing, because I have always been super tired of new stuff coming all the time. I just don't have the energy to be learning the latest and greatest and hopping on the bandwagon all the time. It's taken me 24 years to kind of vaguely learn Java. I'm just I'm not gonna, I mean, obviously I'm kind of exposed to Kotlin because I work for JetBrains, and it's nice to see what other languages do and other programming paradigms, because it's interesting to think in a different way and try and solve problems in a different way. But I can't help but think every time someone comes along and says, oh, this is the latest and greatest language or framework, it'll solve all your problems. It never is going to. It never will.
In my experience, all programming languages that have gained some sort of popularity are useful in some segment, and that is why they're popular. So I do C++ programming, but I wouldn't do C++ programming for the web, though people do that. And I wouldn't write a backend in the C++, and I would probably not write command line tools in C++. So you choose your tools. For tooling, I might use Python. For backend, maybe today, maybe Kotlin, maybe Go. You're in different areas. You choose different tools that make sense for the problems that you're trying to solve.
I generally align with that, except now with the move to serverless, and there's a lot more companies doing more serverless, which is useful for some areas of developing software. It's obviously, if you're doing some other stuff like software for cars, not very useful. So choose your poison. But what I thought about that was that there's so much code that is about infrastructure, and suddenly a lot of the logic about the domain winds up in kind of YAML files and configuration files. I think it would be a really good thing if we start thinking about that a little bit more, and it would be good that ideas from not just as the same thing will turn up there, right? So it's if we do YAML, we don't need to just think about YAML++. We could think about, hey, what is something that actually makes sense that is not YAML? And YAML can be very useful. I'm not saying I hate YAML, it should die. It's more can we build these massive domains with this not even a language?
Of course we can, but we shouldn't.
But sure, great power, responsibility, etc. So that's where I would think we need to probably move and do something more interesting. And I look forward to see that. But on languages, hey, there's beautiful languages.
I think
there's our own little language for every time we need to fix a problem. I mean, you like Java, you can say that with no problem. I can say just build your own DSL for every one of your problems. Good.
I
think
Dom, do you want to jump in there? Yeah.
So I like using Go because it's simple. And like Trisha, I mean, I've been doing this for too many years. I don't want to do something in a very clever way. I want to do something in a basic way so that 2:30 in the morning when it's gone wrong, I can fix it. And I've had situations before where we've had something written in Scala. It was 3 lines of Scala. The intern found where the problem was. He says, this line of code is at fault. I have no idea how to fix it. And you're thinking, okay, I could probably do that.
Is the problem Scala, or is the problem that you're trying to fix something at 3 in the morning?
Well, no, that was actually during the day.
Okay.
I would have done it in Go in probably 10 or 20 lines, but each of those lines would have been easy to understand. So, I will predominantly use Go, although it's not the right tool for every job. Paul's mentioned Rust. If you need really fast stuff, then absolutely go Rust. And there are some other really nice languages out there. Sadly, Trisha, I've fallen out with Java. I fell out with Java a few years ago. So,
wow, that's an amazing. I was like, wow. With that,
I have kids. I use it a lot.
Gillian, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think there is an element of sort of pragmatism to it. I think you're not always going to pick the absolute supreme cleverest thing in every scenario. You have to be what makes sense, not just for the tech problem, but for your people as well.
Yes.
Like the project that I was on before I moved, the big intelligent system, fully serverless, and I don't know if any of the team is out there. Thank you for being terribly good sports. Moved a bunch of Java developers who were writing microservices and asked them to learn Python, which is a big change for them. But so we'd written a lot of stuff in Node, write a lot of my serverless stuff in Node. But the reason we went with Python is there's a lot of machine learning, and we had data scientists involved, and it brought a common language between the developers and the data scientists. And it meant that, the data scientists could look at the code that their models were being deployed out. The developers could look at stuff that the data scientists were doing. And it is a good language for serverless as well. So it was an element of creating some common language so people can talk to each other and understand each other's code and understand, across different domains as well. So I think there is an element of sometimes it's not just about the tech problem. Sometimes it's also about your people and the culture you're in and what's going to make sense for that.
I'd like to plus.
The main thing.
I want to plus that. Well, plus one. What there? I would like to plus one that.
Yeah.
We used a bunch. Well, actually, when I worked on the financial exchange in London, we were using Java. But one of the main reasons, apart from the fact you can get Java to be high performance, is that there are a lot of Java developers, and the people factor is more important than the computer factor, because software problems are always people problems at the end of the day.
Sorry, Paul. Good. Yeah.
I'm going to jump in there because I know of a situation that may or may not be current, that an organization has chosen to go with Java because they have a lot of Java developers, but they are building serverless systems. Now, yeah, Gillian just made a face. And she knows exactly what I'm about to say, which is it's a really, really bad idea. And so it isn't always a good idea to go, we've got these developers, so that's the language we should choose. And I think that there are times where you actually have to turn around and go, this is a bad language choice. And this is a bad choice for this scenario, and we should be doing something else. And I think there is far too much within the tech community of this is the right language because we've got these developers. I think you have to start from what is the use case, what is the platform that we're building on top of, and then if your language fits with the developers that you have, fine, no problem. But if it doesn't, you have to change your language. You cannot just turn around, or your platform. You have to make a different decision. You can't just shoehorn your developers into doing their development in the way that they want. just because they're developers. Developers are actually not the most important thing. Sorry, developers, you're all listening. Very much quite important. You are not the most
Who is
important
this?
thing.
I don't recognize this. I don't recognize this
You are
lump who has
important.
appeared on the call. You know,
You are important.
Yeah.
You're not that important. So I think the point about that is, I think there is a sense that developers do need to be able to be not language agnostic. They don't need to be able to know multiple languages, but they need to be able to be flexible enough to be able to switch from one language to another. And I think that is actually the key.
I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I think that there's definitely a balance, because what we're talking about is the needs, and some of those needs are dictated by the resources you have, your developers. Some of them are business needs and business requirements. But the thing that I have most problem with is jumping on a brand new shiny thing because it's brand new and shiny, and it's probably will maybe solve this problem, but nobody knows because it's brand new and shiny. So you're better off picking based on your people, or based on your existing stack, or based on a set of things that you know are going to solve the problems, even if it's 20 years old. I want to say as well about the serverless versus Java thing. My husband, who is or was a Java programmer, he just moved to doing some serverless type stuff because he's doing a lot of mobile development. And so the last app that he does a lot of startups. The last startup he had a Spring Boot backend, and it was Java, and he loved it because it was quite quick to get up and running because it was Spring Boot. Then he moved to serverless, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't need any of that. Just didn't need any of that code. Like next time, I'm just going serverless with everything because I was a Java developer and I did it the Java way. I did it the quick Java way, but it's not, like you say, it's not always the best solution. So I completely agree with what you're saying. Like I don't believe that every single developer needs to understand the pros and cons of every single language, but there needs the decision makers, the technical decision makers inside organizations need to have a good feel for like what strengths and weaknesses are for various things. What is the genuine business problem? And how can we balance these needs to get the best solution? And I don't mean in a compromisey kind of everybody loses kind of way.
I mean, even on the sort of the serverless and the microservices front, when it started becoming a really big thing, I decided just to start taking the mick, and I came up with this idea of plank services. So they are little services that you fire up that will run XOR or XOR or something like that, and you no longer use code. It becomes an orchestration problem. So you fire up 10 or 15 billion of these services, and it'll simulate your computer for you. And for me, that was just the sort of the logical extension. And of course, it highlights the absolute insanity of taking anything and going too far into the extreme with it.
But surely you were supposed to do that. I mean, someone was going to do it. You just happened to do it.
It just happened to be me.
I mean, I heard about someone else doing exactly that in Azure recently, or something very similar. So I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Why wouldn't you do that?
Cool. So just watching the time here. So I think we can push it to 10 more minutes, and let's spend that on the final question, which is the social responsibility one. So let me just ask the question. So internet access is now essential, if you're going to be a citizen. Yeah. So ever more social and political interactions are occurring online and via the internet, and getting your COVID certificate and so on, which I was doing the other day and so on. So what responsibilities does this place on us, as people involved in software development?
I think. Oh,
Go.
sorry, Patricia.
No, go.
No, it's just like earlier we were talking about cloud-based IDEs and pointing out that if you didn't have super fast internet, you were disadvantaged. I know, Garth, you just said like the internet is a vital part, but not everybody has access to great internet, or maybe I think once I started looking at like ethics in tech and things like that, you start to think about things you never thought about before, like not everybody has a credit card. Not everybody has a bank account. Sitting in tech, you just assume you put your app. You're like, yeah, you need a credit card to use this app, but you don't actually think about the fact that actually now I've ruled out a bunch of people that can't use it, or I've created an app that can only be run on fast internet. Sorry, everybody that doesn't have 5G or broadband. And I think that we don't always, we live in a very privileged world where we forget that not everybody has super fast, broadband or, super fast, shiny phone that can run a cool new app that we've created. And we exclude people accidentally because we're just not thinking about it.
I mean, it's like whenever the leisure centres started to reopen, I had to book it through the web. You know, I could only book a workout through the web. So if you didn't have a browser and it couldn't display the web app, and the web app was pretty bad actually, so you really needed a desktop to use it. It wouldn't really work on a device. So unless you had the right kind of device, then you couldn't go to the gym.
I mean, there's the other thing to consider as well. A lot of people in this industry look very much like me. And we forget that there are other people who are not men and not white. And models are trained against stuff that don't take this into account. And we're not putting stuff into the software that take into account that there's a huge proportion of the planet's population who we're just excluding because man and white and preconceived assumptions. So I think from a social responsibility, it's like go out and make sure that you are writing your software for the target audience and the people who are actually going to use it, not for yourself.
I have to say I've thought a lot about conspiracy theories for the past few years, and I feel that we built an infrastructure for society where conspiracy theories are perfect. Like we made all sorts of software that has to be free, and then we to be able to pay to build this free software, we're going to monetize these people, and to monetize these people, we're going to mine for engagement, and to mine for engagement, we're going to make people angry and scared, and this manipulation, which might not have been intentional in the beginning, became intentional, and we created basically multiple machines to drive people into disinformation holes where they can't escape. They were never taught the tools to escape. I speak to people who are like in my age or older than me, and they were taught to believe what they read. They were taught to believe what they saw on videos because they grew up in a curated content world. And then suddenly being thrown onto Facebook and reading all of these things, and people who look like experts saying all sorts of things, they believe it. And I don't think we appreciate how much of that is our responsibility. And we don't think too much about how are we going to fix it again, because these people are now living in these fake worlds and doing real harm to themselves, to their families, to their communities. Yes,
I agree. I want to follow up with that, which is I've been thinking a lot about responsibility in terms of, I know some of the big companies are like, we provide a platform, it's not our responsibility to curate the content. And the way they say that sounds very compelling. But I thought about an analogy which may help. I think about where I live in Seville, there's quite a lot of graffiti on the walls. It just seems to be one of those cities that has a lot of graffiti. But I'd very rarely see really offensive graffiti. Because at some point, someone will come along, usually the council, and they will remove that graffiti. Because you don't put stuff that makes people feel like crap somewhere where everyone can see it. So if it's a council-owned building or wall or bridge or whatever, they will clean it up. The building that we're in at the moment, we've got 9 apartments in this building. Anytime someone puts even the tiniest amount of graffiti on the wall, one of the guys, he takes the right color paint and paints over it straight away. Because the minute you get one tiny piece of graffiti, it balloons into a whole bunch of graffiti. Now, how does this apply to social responsibility in terms of tech platforms? The council could quite comfortably say, I built a bridge. I didn't build it as something for people to do graffiti on. It's up to people. They have rights. They have rights to write whatever they want on the building. Yeah, of course they do. But I have a right to protect my children from seeing swastikas or from seeing offensive stuff, or reading things that are anti-them, right? Or anti-anyone, honestly. So the council has a responsibility, or whoever, be it a private citizen in their own building, they have a responsibility to keep it clear of stuff which is going to be a problem for other people that come into contact with that thing. And that's what I think that the platforms should be thinking. They should be thinking, I know I didn't create this content. I know this person has the right to graffiti all over everywhere, and I have the right to get rid of it because I don't want it here. Rant over, sorry.
Well,
I was kind of half wondering if it was legal that they graffiti, and I was thinking that probably it isn't legal and that they can't graffiti there. But I was like, okay, that's completely irrelevant. What is and but in a way it isn't, right? Because it could be that these companies have the legal right to say, oh, you know what, it's grand. Just to put all this stuff that really is offensive. It's, I'm legally right. And people will stand trial and whatever, and they'll be like, no, actually, that company with the robot in charge, they are in the legal thing. But I mean, slavery was legal too, right? And a lot of other things, like homosexuality, was illegal until very recently in the UK. I mean, the guy that helped create the computing stuff, Turing was persecuted because he was homosexual, to the point that either he died. So the fact that something is illegal or legal doesn't make it right or wrong. And so how do we deal with that? And then I kind of wind up coming back to like, well, we need to become engaged with all this stuff, which is completely outside of our realm of comfort for a lot of us, right? And so how do we do that? And I think we can do that if a lot of us are doing it. So if I see Patricia going like, I went to the place with the legal stuff about waffles and fought my right to eat waffles on Friday morning, maybe I should do the same and do the same about, alfajores, and then we all, because it's a psychological thing as well. If you see your peers doing things about, doing the next right thing, like in Frozen 2.
Frozen 2.
then you probably do it too, right? Because it becomes slightly less scary and easier. And so, maybe we should do it visibly, which is even more scary.
I think this a lot of the social media regulation and issues come out of US politics. So I think that's a lot of why we have been influenced by US politics across the board. I think that's part of the problem that we have, because we all have to understand why US politics matters. And that is problematic in a number of different ways. But the problematic bit is that we have to understand why Republicans matter, and why Democrats matter, and why, because actually most tech people outside of the US would probably fit into more of the Democratic Party bucket than they would fit into the Republican Party bucket. So actually outside of the US, we're all sitting there watching and thinking, this is a little bit of a basket case. A little bit. I think that's my reading of the world. I could be very wrong. I don't think I am. And so we kind of have to look at all of these social media companies, and they're all pretty much all American. And we have to kind of look at it through the lens of American politics. And when we do that, we're all kind of sitting out from the outside going, well, actually, the only real influence we can have is if we influence the politics, at which point there are some real ethical dilemmas involved in trying to get involved in international politics. And there are some real ethical dilemmas involved in, well, should we try to tell another country how to run stuff?
Well, they bloody do it all the time.
But this is the point: is that you end up with this whole kind of argument of what should we be doing? How should we be doing it? And I have real struggles with how to deal with this problem.
So I've been trying to find a quote that's to do with sort of if you give mankind access to all the knowledge of mankind, great things will happen. And effectively with the internet we've given mankind access to all the knowledge of mankind. And well,
and you're sat there with a poo on your head.
I'm sat there with a poo on my head.
I think one of the things that you find from online debates and so on, and if you follow my Twitter feed, I do far too much of this, but there doesn't seem to be any consensus as to the criteria by which you should hold a belief or make a choice or just do anything. You know, it's the bit where, you know, you're kind of debating with some people and you believe you've got them to the stage where, you know, that they admit to P and not P, you know, and you kind of go, don't you see? And they kind of go, and it's like, no, you know. So it's there doesn't seem to be any framework for deciding, you know, what constitutes, you know, agreement on something. So.
There is one thing you mentioned very briefly, Garth, and I know we have a few minutes. You said Bitcoin, and I think if we're talking about climate change, just don't crypto. Boom.
Well said.
Don't do
There
it.
we go.
Well said.
But which is interesting because, you know, if you remember the beginnings of the internet and the tech bubble and so on, the crypto companies were what everybody was investing in, because everybody was saying, oh, no, nobody would give their credit card details online unless everybody has an X509 digital certificate, which is in a trusted hierarchy, and we'll all have some kind of, you know, chip implanted in our arms that is our digital passport. And that, yeah.
I remember that.
But, you know, if this whole infrastructure isn't in place, nothing can happen on the internet. And then, you know, the entire human population went meh, you know, and we just started giving away all our details online. So there's a certain amount of irony. Yeah.
This is my credit card. Look at that. There's a nice picture here as well. This is a picture of my cat. And look, this is a very strange mole I have in the back of my eye. Stop, please.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And it's all these online. Yeah. I love all these online.
We bought the cameras.
Yeah.
I do love all of these online polls where it's like, you know, will you give us, you know, deep psychological insights into your personality? Don't be silly. Would you like to fill out a quiz to discover which Thundercat you are? Oh yeah. You know.
What was the name of your first pet?
And your mom, last name was she Smith?
I think we just kind of going a little bit deep and sadly going a bit deep, and I'm sorry, apologies in advance. I think we have all lived through the period after, you know, the Enlightenment, and much as that's a fun, you know, boring topic, you know, that was several hundred years ago now, and we're all expecting people to understand the rules, which are you have some evidence and you believe stuff after the evidence. And I think we've now hit a point where the internet is now going, actually, I'm going to choose which evidence I believe. And we're all kind of hitting that where we're like, well, actually, you can't do that. You can't do that. And we're all...
Oh, the internet has silence.
And now we're trying to come to the point where everyone's choosing to not believe that. And I think that's we're kind of transitioning to something else. And that is a problem that I don't think we're going to resolve in a call, and I don't think we're going to resolve it in the next few decades. But I think that's where we're going, is that we're going to have to come up with something different, and it may be a whole range of different things, but I think that's where we are.
Wow.
In terms of like the conspiracy theories and things like that, the only way it seems to get someone out of that, if they've gone really, really deep, is digital detox. Like there's no way to talk to them online or convince them. They have to be lifted out of where they're seeing all that information. And then once they've detoxed a bit, then you can talk to them, and then they can start to go, oh, you're right. Maybe that's not quite right. Yeah. While they're in that environment, while they're surrounded by all that, it is not possible for them to come out of it.
Yeah, but they also need to not read the British tabloids.
Yes.
Just saying.
Very, very much so. So I think, unfortunately, we're at time. So I have to draw this to a close. Yeah. Before I start getting nasty messages from Ryan in the chat here. So just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for attending and for the discussion, and to everybody, and for the wonderful ads. Yes. And for everybody out there attending on the internet and through YouTube, thank you very much indeed. And but Bash will return in next year, which is 2022.
Who knows?
Yes.
Like, how old are you? Oh no, let me check.
The number of times I've done that in the past few weeks. Yeah. So thank you so much, everybody, and hope to see you all in 2022. Have a great Christmas. Bye bye.
Sloan.
Thanks. Bye.